Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. This is the 2024 Total Solar Eclipse Preparation webinar. We have a packed house and lots of very interesting information to share in relation to the upcoming planned special event. We do have some housekeeping and general items to cover before we get started in the agenda. So let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide, please. Before we get started, I do need to mention the disclaimer here. The presentations are created and being co-presented by both Federal Highway and outside entities. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of FHWA or the U.S. Department of Transportation. The contents do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the U.S. DOT. The U.S. government does not endorse products or manufacturers. Trademarks or manufacturers' names appear in this presentation only because they're considered essential to the objective of the presentation. They're included for informational purposes only and are not intended to reflect a preference, approval, or endorsement of any one entity or product. Except for the statutes and regulations cited, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the states or the public in any way. The presentation is intended only to provide information regarding this presentation. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So we're just going to cover some webinar logistics before we get started. So this webinar is sponsored by Federal Highway, and it's being hosted by the National Operations Center of Excellence, also known as NOCO. As a quick reminder, NOCO does offer a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. So I'd encourage you to check out their website. For today's webinar, all attendees are going to be in listen-only mode by default. However, we will have the chat and Q&A open, and we very much encourage you to ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very jam-packed agenda, so there probably won't be time for questions at the end of each presentation. But as you send in your questions, the presenters will have a chance to circle back and answer those questions. If there are any questions that we miss or do not provide an answer to, we'll follow up with you, and we encourage you to reach out to the speakers as well as anybody on the FHWA side if you have any further questions. The webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on NOCO's website after the webinar. I don't know if you noticed, but before the webinar started, we had a rapid fire slide deck that showcases a myriad of projects and initiatives that the Office of Transportation Operations is involved in. We'll be showing those also during the break. A lot of these are useful for things like planned special events, such as the upcoming Eclipse. And each of the slides do have points of contact. So if you need any further information or questions on the particular slide or the initiative or project, feel free to reach out to those who are listed on those slides. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So just a real quick high-level agenda of what we'll be running through. Like I said, we've got a lot of great stuff. We'll be setting the stage on what this planned special event entails, this 2024 solar eclipse. We'll then jump to considerations to think about for transportation agencies involved in this for planned special events. And we'll also do the same thing with considerations for road weather management, considerations for work zone management, considerations for traffic incident management, as well as international travel considerations. And at the end, we'll cover some additional strategies, tools, and resources. And that will be our agenda, and that'll go very quick. We have a lot of great stuff. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is David Johnson. I'm the team leader at Federal Highway. My team is the managing disruptions to operations. We cover things like road weather management, work zone management, traffic incident management, as well as operational data. We also are getting more involved in things like this, like planned special events and events management. So luckily, I have somebody here to help me set the stage. But first, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just real quick, this is kind of a very quick overview of what we're looking at here. We do have on April 8th a large total solar eclipse. You can see the map there, and that the map will be shown several times throughout the webinar. There are 13 states that are directly under the path of totality. You can see the path there. And this eclipse differs from the 2017 eclipse in that there are several larger metropolitan areas that are going to be involved. Dallas, Fort Worth, Little Rock, Indianapolis, Cleveland, and Buffalo, just to name a few. There's many more, like I said, metro areas in close proximity to the path, as we saw in 2017. There was an estimated 32 million people. There are an estimated 32 million people living within the path of totality. That's in comparison to only 12 million in the 2017 solar eclipse. So quite a bit of more people are living within the path. We don't have exact numbers, but we do estimate, and this is based on what we saw in the 17 total eclipse. We anticipate about 5 million people traveling to the path of totality. Maybe not directly into the path that you see in that as that black line that's crossing the United States, but somewhere around there. And a lot of this travel is going to take place right of the day of the event. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And why this matters is, and in relation to what we're talking about is how does this matter in relation to transportation operations? We know that we're going to have a large amount of people, like I mentioned, nearly 5 million people traveling to see the event in the path of totality. Most of these people are going to travel to the path by car. Not to say everybody will, but the vast majority will. As we saw in the 17 eclipse, and I was working in Colorado DOT at the time, arrival does take place over multiple days. Obviously, you see an increase in people traveling the day of, sometimes even up to the hour of the eclipse taking place. And for folks that are traveling ahead of time, if they're days ahead, they've typically planned ahead. But there are folks that don't necessarily plan ahead, and they try and find parking places. They try and find good viewing areas, and sometimes they don't necessarily think through their actions. So obviously, this is relevant for traffic incident management as well as many other aspects of transportation operations. And then also what we see is almost immediately after the event concludes, everybody wants to get out of town. So you would see massive influx of congestion directly after the event because everybody wants to leave. What we experienced in 2017 was basically all interstate routes that were impacted became congested. Interstate routes along the path in 2017 experienced delays of up to 13 hours after totality. And as you know, that creates all kinds of issues, whether it be for emergency management and response, whether it is for folks that don't plan ahead, maybe they didn't bring enough, fluids, water, medications, toilet accessibility, that sort of stuff. So people need to expect long delays during the aftermath of the solar eclipse. Rural non-freeway routes experience congestion up to 15 and a half hours and queues of up to 70 miles. And then, like I said, based on the highway capacity manual level of service, many urban and rural locations experience F level conditions. And the congestion spread well outside the path of totality. The path of totality in the 2017 eclipse was a good couple hundred miles north of where I was in Colorado. And we still saw massive congestion and unpredictable driving behaviors. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned and the potential effects from the 17 eclipse is, for public messaging, we saw, widespread reminders about roadway safety. It may have helped spread the arrivals in 17. So now's a great time to start communicating to your travelers in your state that, expect major delays. Plan ahead. We like to let people know that, immediately after the event, try and stay put for some time. Be prepared, pack enough essentials with you. For the viewing location, people are going to park, particularly those that don't plan ahead. They're going to park wherever they deem either is legal or wherever they can get a really good viewing spot. And that can be just about anywhere. So plan ahead. If you have any sort of areas that can be repurposed for vehicle parking, such as rest areas, and other sort of transportation or trucking facilities. Start thinking about those as well. Weather obviously plays a big a key component of a planned special event like this. For something like the solar eclipse, cloud coverage does play into how people travel and where they go. Obviously, we won't know what the forecast looks like until, well, probably within 24 hours or so of the event. But just keep that in mind that people do change their patterns, particularly if they're trying to view something in the sky. If there are clouds, that's going to change where they try and go. For work zones, the plan is really that we want to minimize work zone activities and lane closures when at all possible. People are going to use, again, any and all areas. Obviously, if you have any portable message signs, we want to communicate that an active work zone or even an inactive zone is not parking, and it's not a place to view. It's not safe. But try and minimize with your contractors your work zone activities. As far as incident management goes, plan for resource deployment such as towers, wreckers. Also, obviously, coordination with your local law enforcement and EMS is critical. If you know where your bottleneck locations are, plan for some resources there. And as far as tourism, you can expect a lot of people to come in and out. Traffic patterns don't typically stay the same when viewing something like this. So just be aware that travel behaviors and volumes and capacity will certainly change ahead of an event like this. And then we do have an international aspect to this, since this does come from Mexico and goes north up to Canada. So if you're in those areas, there's different considerations to think about, and we'll have a session speaking directly to that here later in the webinar. Next slide, please. And I think with that, I'm gonna hand it over to our first speaker. Dr. Kelly Korek let me pull up your bio real quick. Dr. Kelly Korek is a heliophysicist, and she knows how to handle heat. She built and operated instruments to study the sun and understand its hot, explosive outer atmosphere, or corona. Her career has taken her from the desert of New Mexico to Japan to the inner part of the solar system. She was the head of science operations and project manager for SWEEP, the suite aboard Parker Solar Probe. Currently, she's the NASA program manager for the 2024 solar eclipse. Kelly, I'll turn the floor over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is really on behalf of the huge NASA Eclipse Collective that is so excited about the upcoming events on the 8th. Next slide, please. So what is a total eclipse? You'll see on the left there, that darker image is showing the moon going in front of the sun. And we happen to live in this very special place in the entire universe where we have a moon that's just far enough away and just big enough to completely eclipse the sun. On the right, there's a diagram showing you the sun and then the moon that's in the way, or in between the moon and the sun and the earth, to get that blockage. And so this is again a special alignment. It doesn't happen every month because the moon is actually tilted in rotation to the Earth's axis. So we don't hit it every time, every month. So this is more of every 18 months somewhere on Earth, we get one of these total solar eclipses. Next slide, please. So we saw this map a little bit earlier, and this is the path of totality across the United States. So again, coming up through the Gulf of Mexico, up through Mexico, through 13 states, and out through Canada. If you happen to see, there's hash marks all over the United States. So the contiguous United States and parts of Hawaii and Alaska will also see a partial eclipse. So everyone in the US is able to experience a part of this. And we'll talk a little bit about the safety differences between a partial eclipse and a total eclipse. But this map is also very special that NASA made. We used all the information we know about the moon and the actual valleys that it has to make that kind of potato shape or weird shape that you see in these little circles showing the shadow going across the US. So every crater and valley in the moon will either let some sunlight in or not let some sunlight in. So this is a very accurate map of where we will get total darkness. And the closer you are to the center line of this line, the longer the eclipse will be. So this path is both wider than in 2017, and the duration is longer. So you can get up to 4.5 minutes of totality in this, where the moon is completely covering the face of the sun, and you're able to see the sun's corona. Next slide, please. So here's the timing of the eclipse in various locations. And some things to consider is this could be during school commuting time. Some school districts have already announced that they'll be closed at this time. It also could coincide with the lunch or dinner time, rush hours. And so, considering things like work from home orders might be in order. So this is, again, a list, and you could find more times online. Next slide, please. So NASA has a few priorities for this upcoming total solar eclipse. And number one is safety. So we want to make sure that we have safe viewing glasses, because you will have an issue if you were to stare at the sun called solar retinopathy, which actually burns the eclipse or the sun into your retina, which is not something we want folks to do. We also want to broaden participation. This is going to reach around 300 million Americans will have some part of an eclipse this time. So we want to make sure that we have broad participation. We're going to have science experiments, and I'll show you a couple of those. Public engagement in at least 13 spots across the US for NASA. Science activation, where learners actually do science, and citizen science, where scientists can participate in NASA science. Next slide, please. So this is a time-lapse photo of when you're going to need a safe filter or an indirect viewing method. And that's everything to the left or to the right is when you're going to need an indirect viewing method, meaning not looking directly at the sun, unless you have a pair of solar viewing glasses or a strainer or an indirect method. So the solar viewing glasses, like something like these, they're very dark. They're not sunglasses. You would need something much darker than that. Next slide, please. So this wonderful young viewer from Cleveland has her glasses on correctly when looking up at the sun. And these are ISO certified glasses. NASA does not certify glasses. So if folks say that they're NASA certified, they are not, they are actually not NASA certified. We do not certify glasses. There is an ISO standard for the darkness, the thickness of this film to make sure that you have the right thickness there. There's also, again, the indirect viewing methods, such as making a pinhole viewer, like you see there, and instructions are online on how to do that. Next slide, please. Other safe viewing methods, there's a 3D printout that you can that folks can use to actually print out a 3D printable map and a pinhole to, again, put it towards your side and enable you to look at this event. Next slide, please. And by indirect viewing method, what I do mean is your back is to the sun at an indirect viewing method. And you could use something as simple as your hands, making those little pinholes so that you project it on the floor and you actually see the crescent suns at that point in time. You can also use a kitchen strainer to do this. So it doesn't have to be a high cost or have great tools. It's also a great time to look around. Trees will do this naturally. You can even use your hair or some other things in order to make this. So it's great for entertaining kids is how to make these shadows appear on the ground. Next slide, please. So we have on NASA's website Spanish and multilingual resources as well. There is Spanish web content. There will be media coverage, and we have Spanish media language media outlets as well. There will be a broadcast with the Exploratorium as well. And we have materials translated into French and the next most 5 common languages along the path for safety. So these can be downloaded in case there are communities in your area that need them. Next slide, please. So some of the fun science that we're going to do is launching rockets into the eclipse in order to tell how the communication changes during these eclipses. So when the eclipse goes to this day and night, the ionosphere, or the region of the atmosphere where all of our communications go through, collapses. So we're sending sounding rockets to that area before, during, and after the eclipse to really understand the density temperature differences that we see there, to help us further our models to understand things such as space weather that have similar effects. So this is one of the ways that we're using this as a little laboratory that nature's giving us. Next slide, please. We will also have an airplane, the WB-57 research plane, going and chasing the eclipse. So by chasing in the plane, they get an extra 2 minutes of observing time. So we'll be looking at the outflows of this hot solar corona that is flowing away from the sun at all points and at all times through 2 different instruments. And those instruments can tell us about that wind that interacts with our atmosphere, but it also can tell us about the origin of the star in terms of the dusty ring that the whole solar system was made from. So this is a really interesting way to use this. And this is also another point in terms of the airplane traffic. During 2017, we saw a lot of folks try to get up in the air to see this. So this is just another little part of safety that we need to consider. Next slide, please. So NASA is concentrating our efforts in around 13 different locations across the path in order to where we'll have events, and there'll be things that are free for the public with speakers and exhibits and eclipse classes everywhere from Niagara Falls to Holton, Maine, to a couple of places in Texas and in Indianapolis and Cleveland. Again, we looked for a diverse set of places where we could go. There are so many urban centers. We also wanted some more natural or outdoors type centers. So there's lots of variety here to choose from. Next slide, please. And there are many folks can actually do science during these eclipses. So 1 or 2 that I'll point out here that are really interesting. There will be ballooning projects going on across in every state that has the eclipse. You still will be able to see darkness even if there's clouds. So folks will notice something if they are in the path, even if it is cloudy. The eclipse soundscape actually listens to nature as the eclipse happens. And again, even if it's cloudy, it will become darkness during the day. The globe program is also a way to observe the Earth around you. And that way you can actually put that information into scientific research that NASA does on clouds, on the eclipse, on various other things that happen during that time. Next slide, please. And we'll also have citizen scientists working on things. So I mentioned before the communications, we have the ham sci radio folks doing some experiments, as well as looking for things such as Citizen Kate will be taking pictures of the eclipse. So there's many different ways to get involved. And there's actually a heliophysics big year. We're taking this longer than the eclipse. We're going to take it all the way past Parker Solar Probe's closest approach to the sun in December. So we're hoping to get folks excited and interested and participating in this safely, and then keeping up with us and learning more about the sun and the Earth around us. Next slide, please. And with that, may you have clear skies on April 8th.
Thank you, Kelly. Lots of fantastic information. I think I turn it over to you, Kevin, to run through the poll questions.
Thanks, David. Welcome, everyone. We are going to take a couple of poll questions now through the platform Menti, excuse me. If you'd like to participate, I have posted a link in the chat pod below. The first question is, for participants in the 2024 solar eclipse event path of totality, which of the following entities has your agency engaged with to begin planning and coordination for the solar eclipse? It's a and you can answer any and all of these. Local National Weather Service weather forecast offices, law enforcement, trucking associations, towing operators, construction contractors, maintenance staff, or local media. We have some answers coming in here. Let me pull it up. This is a great mix. A very wide variety. From 65 respondents, we have, let's see, law enforcement looks like it's the top answer so far, with maintenance staff not far behind. A lot of contacts to local media, a lot of contacts to NWS weather offices. I'll let this go for a few more seconds. Thank you everyone for participating. All right, I'm just going to start reading the next question, then we'll advance it so that people can answer. For participants in the 2024 solar eclipse event path of totality, which of the following activities has your agency completed or are planning to complete? A planned special event for the solar eclipse, planning meeting with Area National Weather Service Weather Forecast Office? Are you planning a meeting with law enforcement? Solar eclipse messaging for use on social media? Solar eclipse messaging for use on dynamic message signs? Solar eclipse messaging for a press release? Work zone transportation management plans to consider the solar eclipse? Special provisions to modify construction contracts? Contracts for towing operations for the eclipse event?
Looks like a few people can only select one option on this right now.
Oh. Thank you for participating, everyone. Apologies, you can't select multiple. It's on me. Work zone transportation management plans looking like a big one, but solar eclipse messaging for DMSs is the most popular selection. We have one more polling question, and this one's a bit more open-ended. What other key activities is your agency doing to prepare for the solar eclipse? You take your time and write in an answer in the chat box that you were provided. Regular meetings with all stakeholders. Excellent. Along with interagency coordination. I like not allowing oversized permits. I know that's been brought up a few times. Extra staffing, staging response vehicles, limiting lane closures. 45 responses is fantastic.
Yeah, thanks again for taking the time to respond to these polls. That provides us with a little bit of feedback on either areas we need to focus on more, or maybe some research or development that we need to consider. So it's always appreciative that you take the time. Seeing a lot of good responses on restricting oversized and overweight vehicles, which is great. Lots of coordination. The work zone TMP plan, TMPs, considering eclipse activities for the day of something like an eclipse. Really happy to see that mentioned a few times, and I think the polling question showed a big response for that category as well. So all good stuff. All right, Kevin, let's go ahead and switch back over to the slides. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started with this session. We're calling it considerations for planned special events. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So as we've mentioned, we want to involve all necessary stakeholders that we can in something like a planned special event. Advanced coordination is absolutely critical to keeping everybody safe and keeping congestion minimal and helping people get to the event safely and then also get back home safely. Some considerations that you might want to think about in your state is looping in, emergency responders, your fire, medical, and local, state, and public agencies. Obviously, federal stakeholders are important here, as we've talked about with people like National Weather Service and NASA. Non-governmental agencies, third-party data providers, construction and maintenance staff, which we saw responded to very well on the polling. Trucking companies, that's something that if you have a state trucking association, talking to them early in the process really helps alleviate not only oversized, overweight traffic during the event, but all traffic, all truck traffic, so that they're at least aware of what's coming in terms of congestion and mobility concerns. Also, you want to set up interagency communication pathways with your stakeholders. We'll be talking about a program or initiative called Pathfinder here in a little bit. That's really a road weather management focused communication protocol, but it can be used for all aspects, including planned special events. Plan for the day of impacts, obviously related to all things like weather, traffic, incidents, and emergencies, and staff folks where needed. A lot of transportation agencies have traffic analysis and crash reporting. If you know your hotspots ahead of time, and you know that the path of totality is going to be impacting those areas, might be a good idea to consider pre-positioning some resources, some law enforcement, things like that in those high impact areas. Communicate early and often. Your public information offices are absolutely critical in planned special events. They should be looped in, and you should be coordinating on consistent impact-based messaging through your social media platforms. A lot of DOTs will do social media videos, sometimes from their TMCs to show, what they're doing. You also have 511 and highway advisory radio that can be used. One of the key messages that we used in 2017 that I think still plays a role here is the message that we want people to arrive early. We want them to stay put while the event is taking place, and then plan to stay and leave late. I think those three talking points are still pretty powerful when it comes to the planned special event that we're seeing with the eclipse. And they're all pretty simple to put on 511 or changeable message signs. Proactively manage your roadways before, during, and immediately following the path of totality. Kind of goes without saying there. So next slide, please. So next up, we have Patrick Sung. Let me introduce him. Patrick has more than 18 years of traffic and ITS engineering, planning, design, construction, inspection experience, coupled with his leadership experience in advancing the state of the practice for transportation system management and operations around the country. He was involved in the 2017 total solar eclipse through his role as the previous managing director of NOCO. He's been involved with the Amateur Astronomical Society's Solar Eclipse Task Force through the local planning working group in anticipation for the 2024 total solar eclipse. Thanks for coming on, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, and really appreciate the invitation here. I'm one of the many people that have been waiting 7 years for this, and if you go to the next slide, you'll see why. I got super excited in 2017, and of course, I had my first daughter that was born in July, and it happened in August of 2017. So I couldn't exactly convince, my wife and my 1-month-old to go out and look at a solar eclipse. But knowing that it was going to come 7 years later, which, time flies, I know exactly where I am going to be for the 2024. So as much as we get wrapped up in the planning and, potentiality of everything, hopefully you all have at least figured out where you will be on April 8th, 2024. Next slide. One of the few opportunities that we get, especially in our practice of managing and operating the transportation system, is to remember what were our lessons learned. A lot of what has been said already, from Kelly and from David, is wrapped up in a lot of the lessons learned that came from 2017. It was great to see the responses of more activity, very proactive activity that's going on right now. And especially for the TSMO practitioners that are out there, traveler information is on full display. Make sure everything works right, your backup systems. Generally, it goes on without a problem. So the messages, coordinating those messages is really good. Everyone's going to worry about all the congestion and the traffic backup, and you hear the 13-hour, 13-hour delays and everything like that. Just remind them that in 2017, when we had this with kind of less prep and not knowing what's going to happen, we had long delays, but there were almost minimal, if not no accidents in the various states that went across the continental United States. So just as a minor note, pay attention to your 2-lane highways if you got them that are within or near the path of totality. Your bottlenecks, you can kind of map them to your path of totality. And this is something that planners will often do, is you worry about how are the people all going to get there, where are they going to park, how are you going to manage all that. That sort of sorts itself out. But as you just heard David mention, worry about the people leaving all at once, right? So you're going to have that phenomenon that goes on with special events. So really that message did work for the most part, but then again in 2017, a lot of those places were national parks and really out in the open area. So that's why the 2-lane highways also became incredibly congested. Next slide. A few other things that were important to remember as you talk to your colleagues is that, oh, that's only happening in that state. And look, the path of the totality doesn't go beyond into my county. Well, you will be affected by it, right? David can probably tell you stories. In Colorado, they were not in the path of totality, or not significantly, but then they got a lot of the traffic, right? And so that's why it's important to talk to your neighbors, not just in states, but at the city, county, MPO, townships level, really to make sure that they're coordinated, they are aware of this, right? And that goes into kind of the next bullet of coordination. David also mentioned something that we found, and we've been trying to make sure people know, is pre-staging your response crews, your incident response, your freeway service patrols. Pre-stage those in areas that if it's going to get congested and there's no other way there, get your responders out there ahead of time so that they're not trying to fight through kind of gridlock or anything like that. The last kind of note that I'll leave you with lessons learned, because the other speakers are really going to give you a very good depth of information, is to reach out to your atypical people. You heard Kelly from NASA, and I've been working with Lori Ratto, who's going to be speaking later with amateur astronomers. But you have meteorologists, your news reporters, all your school systems, anyone involved in academics, your traffic reporters, tourism. If you've done all this special event planning and you have not talked to your tourism department, please go talk to them, knock on the door, make sure they are aware. If you look up some of the hotel prices in the middle of Dallas, where I'll be, one night can get our nightly rates can be around $700 plus. So when it's at the path of totality, it's really concentrated. They know something's going to go on. So please make sure you reach out to people that you don't normally talk to. And so these were some of those things where we have this rare opportunity where this total solar eclipse happened in 2017. We knew it was going to come back again in 24, and we are preparing for it. And so thank you for David and all the folks that are leading the efforts to make sure we are preparing this, everything from the federal to the state to the individual kind of cities and townships out there. So with that, I'll turn it back to David.
Thanks, Patrick. Really good advice, particularly with the resource pre-staging. I can't overstate that enough. It's absolutely critical. If you know you have bottlenecks in areas of concern, think about pre-staging your safety service patrol, some law enforcement, anybody there that can support. All right, next up, I think we have Chris Engelbrecht. Chris serves as the director of the Safety and Emergency Management Division with the Missouri Department of Transportation. Chris has over 29 years of experience related to disaster management, security, traffic incident management, and occupational safety. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the invite to be here today, and thanks to everyone for joining us here this afternoon. So I want to talk a little bit about the considerations for the planned special events, as it relates directly to the eclipse. Next slide, please. So, I think the important thing to remember here, and you're going to hear a lot of information probably repeated from many of the speakers today, but this is a big deal for a lot of people. It's not only in some cases just an interesting, but there may be also a cultural and spiritual following in some cases too. I recently had an opportunity to speak to a few of my foreign colleagues, and even as far as Japan, they were talking about the eclipse that was coming to the USA. So it's a well-known event, and again, there are a lot of foreign tourists that actually travel in just to see the event. So it's more than just a few minutes of darkness. That interest goes well beyond local areas. And again, that's the concern we have. And again, Missouri, we were lucky enough in 2017 to be in the path of totality and again in 2024. So we've kind of learned firsthand the potential for massive traffic impacts. And I think planning is really the key to making sure that we address those up front before the event starts. So next slide, please. So you've seen this slide a couple of times here already. Missouri, right in the middle of the country, is really kind of a glancing blow on what I'll call our boot heel area. So we have a small region that's impacted in 2024. In 2017, the path really came from the west to the east across the middle of the state, and it really aligned with Interstate 70. So there were a lot of opportunities during that event to view nearby Interstate 70, truck parking areas, rest areas. We don't have so many urban type locations at this point in Missouri for the 2024 eclipse. So we're going to be a little more compressed and consolidated where the viewing in the path of totality is going to take place. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, there are already 32 million people which live within the path of totality. St. Louis is fairly close to one of those, to the path of totality, again, with Cincinnati, Detroit, Toronto. And then you've got some very major urban metropolitan areas that are within 200 miles of that path of totality. So we'll see a lot of migration towards that path, probably the day of the event. If they're within a few hours of drive time, they likely may not go stay overnight unless there's another event that they're going to attend. So this may be one of the biggest mass travel events in the USA. Next slide, please. So again, it does clip just the bottom portion of Missouri. 2017, we had a viewing time of around 2.5 minutes of totality. This event actually is going to be nearly double that at almost 4.5 minutes in some locations. So definitely worth the time and the trip to make it up. You will get a pretty good duration of time that you're going to get to see. It's going to hit us right around that middle of the day time. So somewhere around that 2 o'clock time. So again, we will have lots of time to get in the morning, lots of time for people to do social activities, and then hang around and leave, which also leads to some other issues in some cases with impaired driving that you'd have to also plan and predict. Next slide, please. So before the event, next slide. We've mentioned a lot already about agency collaboration. Within Missouri, we've actually been having a monthly call with all of our partner agencies, including surrounding states, to kind of coordinate our activities. And that not only includes, of course, our DOT internally, but also our law enforcement partners with our state highway patrol, our Department of Homeland Security, because one of the other things we do have to remember that there are large gatherings of pedestrians, and those are also prime targets for lone wolf attacks in soft target areas. So definitely include your Homeland Security folks in that discussion. Not only that, but our State Emergency Management Agency, in 2017, we actually activated our State Emergency Operations Center for the duration of the event. We plan to do the same thing. This event worked very well to coordinate with all of our agencies and our local area command as things were taking place. And then also coordinating with again, tourism that was mentioned earlier, along with our Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, to really look at where those impacts are going to be in the rural areas, especially around campgrounds that are going to get fully packed during the event. Next slide, please. So planning is important. Again, chambers of commerce, your tourism boards, these are great locations to gather information. So if you can, again, pull this and kind of map some of those special events that are going to take place, where those mass gatherings are going to happen, that will help you predict some of the problems and the issues that you're going to run into with the congestion. A lot of universities and colleges will host events because they do have large facilities, especially if they're in the path of totality stadiums. But also there will be a lot of festivals and even individuals that will try to draw and attract people, whether it's parking or having some kind of a music festival. But also the campgrounds, hotel capacities, these are all kind of important factors to look at. And if you can gather that information well ahead of time, give you a good idea of, again, where your impacts are going to be and how to model that traffic and determine what mitigation measures you need to take. Next slide, please. So not only the severe congestion is a concern for us, but we also have to think about, traffic incidents. On a normal day, we see numerous incidents, but when you start talking about the amount of traffic that we're going to see during a total solar eclipse, especially in isolated regions like the Southeast Missouri, those incidents can multiply pretty quickly. Weather also in early April can be very unpredictable throughout a lot of the country. So again, we're gonna talk a couple different times about weather, but what we saw in 2017 was a cloudy sky over our northwest part of Missouri, and we saw a mass migration take place early that morning, understanding that they were not going to get a good view of the eclipse where they were. So saw a lot of movement that day of the event. And I mentioned already soft target attacks. Again, plan for those and maybe even provide some protection barriers and those kind of things if you're going to have areas that are close to roadways. And then also think about the possibility of communication system failures or overloads. You get a lot of people on a single cellular communications tower that may actually create problems for everyone too. Next slide, please. So planning mitigation strategies, some things to think about, traffic modeling and traffic signal scenarios, just being prepared with multiple scenarios to be able to implement quickly. it was already mentioned, kind of pre-staging some traffic control devices, whether it's message boards or even barricades and extra channelizers, if you do have to make some last minute adjustments to your traffic plans. Having those bypass routes already prepared in case you do have a large event, and then thinking about where you need to restrict parking and actually enforce that restriction. Next slide, please. So again, think about congestion. Inform your drivers that they are going to encounter congestion and not to stop along interstates or shoulders. That's going to create a lot of problems for them, and it's also going to create more congestion, and it's just not a safe place to be. Also, try to advise folks early not to try to take photos while driving down the road. Sounds common sense, right? Don't wear Eclipse glasses while you're driving because you really can't see well out of these. Turn your headlights on ahead of time because it will get fairly dark, and auto headlights may or may not pick up quickly as quick as this turns to darkness. So, and also you will have a lot of pedestrians that are going to be near roadways. So watch out for pedestrians. Next slide, please. So during the event, again, several strategies: meter, manage that entry if you can, traffic signal timing, pre-stage traffic control. Again, motorist assist is very important, as Patrick mentioned. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So digital message signs prior to day of event, just making sure that we do have, again, appropriate messages that lead up to the event and then also during the event. Next slide. And then finally, after the event, next slide, please. Let's make sure that we do utilize those ITS devices that we have available. I'll talk more about that in our work zone segment we have coming up, but we want to be able to identify those incidents quickly and utilize our safety service patrols to address those as soon as possible to minimize the secondary crashes, adjusting our DMS messaging as the day goes on. Next slide, please. And again, the motto: arrive early, stay put, leave late. The more you can convince people to stay put during the event and extend their duration at their events, the better off we're going to be with that mass exit. So we greatly appreciate that. Next slide. And that's what I have for this session. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Good information. I saw a lot of interesting stuff in 17 when I was in Colorado, but I didn't see anybody driving down the road with Eclipse sunglasses. So hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody for this eclipse. Thanks for hopping on, Chris. Next up, we have Lori Radow. Lori, from 2004 until her retirement at the end of 2016, Lori Radow served as a member of the Federal Highway Administration, U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Operations, Traffic Incident and Events Management Team. As a member of the AAS Eclipse Solar Eclipse Task Force, Ms. Radow currently serves as the co-chair of the Local Planning Working Group. And thanks for being here, Lori. Happy to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dave. So the names of the teams have changed since I've gone, but I manage the Planned Special Events Program at Federal Highway. Next slide. Can you hear? So I hope you're done planning. It's time to move to operations, and that's what I'll spend some time talking about. And with time being short, both the time before the eclipse and for this presentation, I thought it best to flip the standard presentation and start with resources. But not to worry, to get us back on track and make things right, I'll give you some resources at the end about this and other future planned events. Patrick talked a bit about it. The American Astronomical Society has taken this on, and this is their webpage with a lot of good material for you to go to. I highly recommend it. We've kind of culled the problem with post-2017 was a lot of documents that were good, that were used as good planning tools. I want to say Wyoming, and I think it was Wyoming, disappeared. So find a way to preserve your material. There's not another eclipse to 2040 until 2045, but other major events. I've written a couple articles for the Domestic Preparedness Journal, primarily geared for the emergency management world. The third one's just been sent off to them. So that's another place you may want to go and look at. Next slide. The AAS, they're getting the country prepared. Let me a quick word about the AAS. National events do not happen, as evident by this webinar. That the AAS took this on has impressed me from the beginning, because no organization, not even the federal government, is designed to organize a national event. I'll talk a little bit about one that's coming up in a couple of years, but it's a major undertaking. I became a member of the Solar Eclipse Task Force in 2020. Kelly's on it. As in the spring of 2021, as AS heard more and more from localities asking for help, they established working groups. In late spring, I agreed to chair the local planning working group, only if I had a co-chair, because I do not speak science. I am more than pleased that Bob Baer, who organized the Southern Illinois University 2017 Eclipse and is doing the same for the upcoming one, agreed to serve as the co-chair. We started off meeting monthly. In 2023, we have bi-monthly calls because people are very, very busy. The workshops that AS has held over time, first virtual and now combined, have been recorded, and you can get to those as well, but all on the AS website. Next page. So, as Chris has shown and others, the Eclipse, the organizations who are managing it have taken the lead. Mostly, I get the sense through the talks I've had with the working group members is they were the first organization to realize the eclipse was coming, and they sort of got things going. The woman in Oklahoma with the Chamber of Commerce started 5 years ago. It's the only county in Oklahoma that will have it. It's a rural county. She's doing a phenomenal job. And also, as Chris mentioned, Perryville County, Missouri. Trisha Eza is the tourism person. Knew nothing about eclipses in 2015. She's now the national expert. Each locality is specific to how they've done it, and many of them have never had much in the way of interactions with DOTs, mostly because the events they've done have been on their campus, like museums. So they are, when you talk to them about transportation, it's not their world. And to answer one of the questions I saw in the chat, and I mentioned this as we were getting ready. In 2017, I got asked, is it okay if cars pull over on the side of the interstate and watch from there? And I'd say, sure, if you want to die. So you're going to have to be very good about telling people what they cannot do, because people do not understand about safety when these large crowds. Next slide. So as you can see, because all you people are data people, this is not based on any fact, but I just wanted to keep you awake. And there is no one model, but transportation strength and also the emergency management world's expenses, you are subject matter experts. And the groups that you are working with don't know much about what you can share with them. They don't know what a TMC is. They may look at a variable message sign, not a clue. They don't even know how they are come into being. So you have a lot of work to do if you haven't gotten them up to speed on it just yet, but that you need to get them comfortable with as that weekend unfolds. I shouldn't say just a day. There will be people coming in a few days ahead. For example, one of the things I tried to explain to the Solar Eclipse Task Force was, so have you ever heard of ESFs, or emergency support functions? And I got blank stares over Zoom. So they don't know what it is, but they will benefit from it. So those are the things that you have an awful lot of knowledge to share. And it's okay. I have learned an awful lot from these working group meetings we've had over the past couple of years. So there's a lot of communities have an awful lot from different fields of expertise. Share it. Next slide. So with less than 6 weeks to go, 7 weeks ago, you got a lot of operational considerations. Tabletop exercises is one where most of the people who you are working with have never done one. And as I said, now a good time to explain what ESF is. Field tests, maybe coordination with the transit authorities, including what transit routes, private sector awareness. As we're a country with 3-day food supply, you got to make sure they are stocked, because as it's been pointed out, a lot of people will be coming into your locality. The other is, my guess is most of you with TMCs have brought in your traffic reporters to view the TMCs. How many of you have brought your weather folks in and have them give maybe for the next month or so weekly updates, and as you get closer to the Eclipse, daily updates of what to expect? In part because, as Chris said, it was cloudy overhead in Missouri for part of that day. And I have even heard people say, I will give you the route to get to a place where it is sunny. Well, I don't know. Sometimes it's not sunny when you get there. And the other is, you're not the only one going to get into a car when you see it overcast. What you will do if you get in your car is so will everyone else, and all you will see is a row of red lights. And as we know, that can lead to secondary crashes. So the messages, as David has said and others, that the AASHTO, I think it was Eclipse Task Force Working Group, came up with in 2017, get there early, stay put, stay late. Well, we got 2 out of 3, but the third one is critical. But back to good maps, sharing those maps. The whole bit about Eclipse glasses, they may be gone by now. Ones that have been approved, I know the AAS has a group, working group that has looked at the quality of glasses, but I think they told us even late last year, a lot of the reputable companies have sold out. So, and there was in 2017, a lot of fraudulent glasses being sold. So I would be careful at this point of at this time to be expecting quality glasses. Working as Chris, talking with your, not just your emergency management people, but medical. People fall, they hurt themselves, they have heart attacks. You got to make sure that the vehicles can be available to get to those people in a timely manner, because you will have large crowds. As you are finishing up your plans, you've collected data. So airline bookings, hotel reservations, car rentals, to get an idea of expected numbers. Yes, people will be driving, but a fair number of people will be flying, and there will be car rentals at airports that you can check on. And the other, a little more difficult, but as Chris said, people from overseas. So not everyone coming to this country needs a visa, but to give yourself as much information as you can on who's coming from where. And I should say, I had a call with the working group a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about that they could gather license plate data and figure out what counties they were coming from, so they could figure out distances. So you have at your fingertips a lot of data, and then put that to use. Next slide. So as you're moving into your operational plans, as people have mentioned, a lot of public lands, not just federal, but state, and those will have, the parks, state and local, certainly are open all the time. I think in 2017, the national parks opened up as well. There's also Fish and Wildlife. So lots, and they often aren't included in the discussion of transportation plans. And if you have time, I would say contact them and figure out how they are sharing information with the people who will come visit them. Maybe the Park Service, but I don't think others charge fees, so they may not have a sense. But that's just a lot of parallel efforts are going to be going on at the same time, and you may not be aware of all of them, unless you're someplace like Missouri where you have a statewide effort. Goods movement, particularly, I think there's been discussion about what's moving across the Canadian border and how that will be managed. Others will talk about work zone, traveler information. How do you share a common VMS message? Parking information. And again, do you know whether schools are closed or not? And if they're closed, will you be able to have you designed your transportation plans to accommodate them? Health and emergency response. I don't know, are we in the last stages of the pandemic? I can't quite figure out where we are, but it is still floating around. Never mind that people get injured. But you also have large crowds not familiar with the area. And then finally, as Chris said, there's been violence, gun violence at large crowds, and you need to be prepared for that. And you don't, not transportation per se, but you need to talk with your emergency management people about placement of their response vehicles. So it allows people, the responders to get there, but will still let people see the eclipse. One other thing that I was reminded by astronomers have told me is when we go to football games, when we do other things, we are looking at straight across. Looking for the eclipse, we're going to be looking up, and it changes our dynamics entirely of how we respond to our surroundings. So it's hard to train people for that or explain it, but it's just people will behave a little bit differently. Let's see. And again, those three messages, you gotta have people understand that you don't want them in traffic for great lengths of time because the possibility of secondary crashes and other things as well. So all those things need to be conveyed, and maybe that's what's done when you open your operation centers to the transportation and weather folks. Next slide. So again, much of this will be talked about in the other presentations, but people don't really know what a VMS is. So you've got a great, and in many ways, this event is a great way to educate people, because a lot of people coming in not familiar with the locality, and you can, through your DMC presentations, through the reporters, get them to understand all the capabilities transportation has to make their experience much more enjoyable and much safer. And I think others have quoted not 511 as well, so I won't go there as well. Next slide. After action reports, I always love the phrase lessons learned. Yeah, and what did you ever do with that lesson? So you have the opportunity to take what is done and put it to use. We at the AS, I've had circulating through the working group, we've developed a questionnaire about sort of what happened, and we want to get it posted before the eclipse so that it can be available to all the localities. And then so what you may want to do is designate a few people to circulate around and talk to the volunteers so that they are making notes of what happened. And have those volunteers summarize the information so that when they bring back, maybe in June, the people to do an after action discussion. And I think often people think of an after action discussion as you did something bad, and it's not. And this is where transportation and emergency managers also have the opportunity to explain to everyone that it's an opportunity to review what was done and improve it. And that's how lessons get learned. It's not just, oh yeah, we know not to put the cars there, but why, and why do you place them someplace else in the future? So there's a lot of opportunity that you can use this event for future events. Next slide. So those opportunities, okay. When I would mention 2045, everyone would laugh and say, I'm not going to be around then. you're talking to someone who was involved in 9/11, so it's not that long ago, and that's about the distance from now to then. But on July 4th, 2026, it will be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And those of us who remember the 200th, the bicentennial, it was a big deal. And of course, it wasn't the full country, but there were a lot of events. Congress has already designated funding, so the events are all underway. So you do have that as a sort of a take all this that you've learned and start thinking about what you how to start applying it. And I would think it's I don't know how each state is set up and I can't pronounce how you say the 250th. But I would say as a state agency, you can check to see who is the lead agency in your state and start working with them. And again, states have also are about to celebrate their major anniversaries. I know Missouri just was it 150th or something like that. So that's another statewide event. And you may want to sort of go through that list of what's coming up and start thinking about those. If you're at a state DOT, you certainly are involved with your Department of Agriculture or others on the state fair, so you have good coordination during interagency participation. One last thing, I think what's often overlooked is because of this eclipse, you are part of a group that has never really gotten together before. You suddenly have a wonderful group that you can put to use as a citizens corps. Sadly, there will be many more unplanned events in the future. And if you have people who understand the dynamics of transportation, what's all involved, besides them just getting their car and driving away, and then to a lesser degree, that is where you need to bring in the emergency management people of how that plays as well. You have started to build a really strong citizen core group that can help mitigate some of the just huge numbers of things that need to be when something of that nature happens. So you have to figure out how to tap people that you have brought into the world of transportation and you've been brought into theirs and how to build off of that. Next slide. As I mentioned, I'd end with more resources. And these are the federal highway resources. When I was at Federal Highway, I would always tell people to look at the full list of publications that the Office of Operations puts out, because it may be what you're looking for is not under its title. I did one in, I think, 2006 on traffic incident command system, and it was under traffic incident management, but not under planned special events, which I later took on. There's a fair number of things on emergency management, evacuations. So I would just sort of go through the list. There's one on how to do a tabletop exercise. The National Special Security Events has checklists, as does the checklist for practitioners. And the checklist for practitioners has a checklist on after action activities. So that's it. Thank you very much. Next slide, just if you need to find me.
Thanks, Lori. Appreciate it. And there's Lori's contact information if you want to reach out to her, and appreciate your time. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide here and start covering some more of the transportation operations areas, including work zones, road weather, and traffic incident management. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So as many people have mentioned, weather is obviously something that we need to consider with a large planned special event. It can cause people to change their plans. It can make certain situations dangerous. Really just depends on what the weather and the road weather impacts are. Obviously, viewing the eclipse is dependent on fair weather conditions. Dealing with that in Colorado, and you'll hear from Vince here in a little bit. Dealing with that in Wyoming, and Paul Schlatter will be speaking during this session on how day of things like cloud cover or precipitation on a localized area really can cause significant changes, and it can throw your best plans kind of out the window sometimes. So it's always really important, really good to loop in your National Weather Service. I think Lori's suggestion of bringing them into your TMC and also visiting their offices just to have that camaraderie utilizing their tools like National Weather Service chat, having a one-on-one conversation with a meteorologist that's looking at the next 24 hours is something that I think is incredibly undervalued when it comes to planning for these things. So start thinking about that. And there's several agency and other stakeholder resources that we're going to talk about on this road weather management session. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide real quick. One of the things is the Pathfinder initiative. And for those who aren't really in the road weather management realm, the Pathfinder initiative is really that DOT coordination with your National Weather Service. It's a collaborative partnership where you get together and you review the forecast and you come up with a comprehensive, consistent, impact-based messaging that can be displayed on your 511. It can be displayed on your changeable message signs. And it's really not just pulling in those National Weather Service partners. You're also talking about a lot of state DOTs have third-party weather service providers, particularly when it comes to things like maintenance decision support systems, but also emergency management and your local public works. Pathfinder can be, its focus is in road weather, but it's a communication protocol essentially that can be expanded to include construction contractors with work zones. We did that in Colorado under our Pathfinder initiative. It can also be used for large incidents, fuel truck fires or hazmat conditions that happen on the interstate. It can be used in a myriad of different ways. So yes, Pathfinder is embedded very deeply into road weather, but it's important to start thinking of this as more of a framework, a communication protocol that can be utilized to inform travelers. And really that should help us improve safety, mobility, and the commerce of our travel in the US. Next slide, please. So leveraging Pathfinder for something like the total solar eclipse is you really want to delegate your key stakeholders from the state, DOT, law enforcement, other partners that I mentioned on the previous slide. Some things that you can consider now that we're 6 or 7 weeks away leading up to the eclipse is, develop and agree upon a coordinated public messaging language. I'll cover a little bit later some MUTCD compliant messages that can be used during the eclipse, but also think about National Weather Service as well, and your social media. Start using the same terms. National Weather Service can sometimes have more meteorological terms, and we need to translate those into road weather and transportation operations terms. So get together with those partners and start communicating with them on, okay, what does it mean when you say, expected, localized flooding? How can we communicate that in a certain way to our traveling public? Or what does a snow squall mean? That kind of stuff. How do we coordinate those terms? And in the days leading up to the event, really start looking at your forecasts. Start working with your National Weather Service partners. They're going to be running atmospheric models. Really, that 24 to 48 hour window is key. That's really when you start seeing the accuracy improve with modeling, as well as the confidence for your meteorologist to say, yes, I think this is going to happen. We should really start communicating this. And it really plays into something like a planned special event because it helps communicate ahead of time what people can expect. And really the emphasis behind this is changing driver behavior, making sure their driving behavior is safe and that they're not surprised by something like an intense rainfall that they weren't expecting. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And now I get to introduce Vince Garcia, somebody that's been in the road weather management realm for quite some time. Vince Garcia is a graduate of the University of Wyoming with a degree in civil engineering and has worked for the Wyoming Department of Transportation in various capacities for over 38 years. He was instrumental in building statewide transportation in building the statewide transportation management center. And he's led a team that has deployed numerous intelligent transportation systems, including pre-trip, roadside, and in-vehicle systems. Vince, thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. And I guess to the Pathfinder element, we definitely been a big advocate of Pathfinder for a number of years. It's almost second nature to us at this point. We use it for virtually every winter event, and certainly during the eclipse. So If I could you just click on the movie to kind of set the scene? What we did is put together a time lapse of the webcam pictures that we had. And as you can see, traffic is going northbound from Colorado through Cheyenne. And then during the eclipse, things settle down, typical traffic patterns. And then after the eclipse, you'll see the flood of traffic heading back to Colorado well into the night. So those things that you heard about the traffic and the delays were very, very real. So next slide, please. And I guess in the interest of time, I can tell you that we did a lot of planning. I know that other states kind of covered this very well. Certainly Missouri covered this quite well. So I'm going to just ask to click to the next slide, please. Pre-event activities. One thing that I might bring to your attention is that we did do the pre-positioning of assets, and we certainly coordinated with people as much as possible. Next slide, please. I think our public affairs office would tell you that the biggest thing that they found that helped tell the story, the most impactful thing, was that our web cameras and certainly the traffic counts. We made sure that the normal traffic counters that were quite operational. We made sure that they had advanced information, and then after the event, we got the information about the traffic counts as quickly as possible, and even during the event. Next slide, please. Many of you know, but in Wyoming, the Highway Patrol is part of the Department of Transportation, so we worked well together. Maintenance personnel and troopers were staged for the event, and they worked well into the 20-hour range. Many of them were kind of focused on this event for the 3 days prior to this. The Highway Patrol saw a doubling of crashes from the previous year and almost a triple of the number of computer-aided dispatch events through the dispatch center over that 4-day period. Just to highlight that we will never be able to plan for everything. We even had a vehicle hit by a bison during this event. Next slide, please. This one might look like an eye chart to you. I apologize about that. And I'll kind of just touch it very briefly, but many things worked quite well, including the statewide radio network, which was really critical to us, and the cell network. We were a little bit concerned about that. We did a lot of preparation in advance with the cell companies. Being in Wyoming, our cell communication is a little inferior. They brought in additional resources, and that worked out well. The preparations really paid off. Also working with local communities and organization within WYDOT and the state, other sister agencies. Next slide, please. Jumping into some of the lessons learned. First, as you heard, the weather really looked like it wasn't going to cooperate. We had clouds over most of the state for a few days prior to the eclipse, and the forecasters were telling people, much like you heard, I think, in Missouri, they were telling people places to get better viewing locations. So people were driving all over the state, kind of chasing point to point. As it turned out, the clouds lifted all over the state, and it was really a great viewing event. Traffic volumes were at record levels for us. I can't imagine really another single event that would generate this kind of traffic, and you'll hear that from a number of people. But people need to be patient, and they really need to plan for this, almost like they would plan for a winter storm. They need to have a full tank of gas. They need to have water. They need to have food, because they are going to be delayed. And it's clear that you need as many facilities as possible. You can never have enough bathrooms. We'll hit that maybe a couple of times. But people should be very much prepared for this. Next slide, please. So in terms of rest areas, WYDOT has a bunch of those, and many of them use septic systems. We had to pump those prior to the event. Probably could have been prepared to pump those during the event as well. They really did fill up. We had to mow adjacent locations because we had situations where it was August. In Wyoming, that's the driest time of year. Certainly the conditions are such that if a person were to park into areas in the right of way, they could have started a grass fire. So we had to be prepared for that. More porta potties. We had a lot of impact at the regional airports. People were actually popping from airport to airport, going across this to get as much viewing as possible. So those small little regional airports, they could have even used additional bathroom facilities. We probably made a bit of a mistake in terms of construction. We anticipated that there would be a lot more activity prior to the event. And so we closed down construction for like 5 days prior to the event. We learned that that wasn't necessary. Really, the day of the event and the day after were all we really need to focus on. I think you kind of heard that from Missouri as well. Next slide, please. Restrictions. We also put some restrictions in place to limit oversized vehicles prior to the event and during the event. We were able to lift that early. It turned out that was not as big of a concern as we thought it might be. Traffic counts, this was a huge thing. We had to make sure those things were working and get the information to the public as quickly as possible. We had to train people on how to report those traffic numbers as well, because you can imagine that a person went over multiple counters. People wanted to anticipate that, you know, there were millions of people that came in the state. Well, they were going over multiple counters, so they had to be able to understand that. The patrol had to staff up for this. So I think I actually missed a slide, but the numbers are kind of impressive in terms of what the patrol had to deal with. Next slide, please. Satellite phones. We were prepared with satellite phones, but frankly, we didn't even need them. It turned out that they didn't add a lot of value. So I'm not sure what others feel about that, but we didn't find that to be all that effective. And then in terms of the media, we could have probably used our highway advisory radios more. The small communities, they work really well for big events, we found. And as a result, people could tune to those and get information in locations far away from a dynamic message sign or a variable message sign. We could have staged people for real-time information, almost like reporters, pulling information and relaying it to the public and getting interviews and the like. We probably were overly focused on social media. We could have used the regular media more efficiently and more effectively. Next slide, please. The governor's office made a huge effort to really combine efforts. And so we were working with Homeland Security and tourism and the like, certainly in the National Weather Service. We held pre-event conferences and conferences leading up to this event. We held them during the event and then after, and those were very, very successful. So credit to the governor with respect to that. And then in terms of benefits, we found that this is really the event that probably tested our systems, our highways and airports more than any other that we've seen before and may see in some time. It allowed us to build valuable partnerships with other state agencies and allowed us to kind of realize what we need to do to handle these really big events. Next slide, please. And that's what I have for you, David. I could go back to the Highway Patrol slide if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead real quick.
Can we roll back a few? I'm not sure why I missed that.
I think I saw it earlier.
Did you? There it is.
Yeah.
I guess I did kind of address this. Like the one thing that I guess I will tell you is the crashes were more than double. And then again, the workload for the patrol was about, in terms of patrol dispatch, was about triple. So I did cover that. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. I see there's one vehicle with the bison hit there under the crash column. That one always makes me smile, but probably a dangerous situation, but not something you hear every day. So
not something you hear every day, but certainly that'll stop a car.
It certainly will. Thanks, Vince. I appreciate you taking the
bet.
time to share your experiences with us. All right, let's go ahead and move forward to the next speaker. We have Paul Schlatter, my former Pathfinder buddy in Boulder office. So Paul is the Science and Operations Officer at the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Boulder, Colorado, a position he's held for over 7 years. Paul has been with the National Weather Service his entire 21-year career, with positions in Norman, Oklahoma, as well as at the NOAA and National Weather Service headquarters in the Washington, D.C. area. Paul, it's great to see you, and thanks for hopping on, and let's share some of our experiences we endured during the 2017 eclipse.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, I'm going to give the perspective of the services that the National Weather Service provided during the 2017 eclipse. And these are also many of the same things that any weather service office that you all are connected with could easily do for you as well. So just kind of look at it through that lens. Next slide. But before we talk about the eclipse, I think it's important to at least give an overview of what our relationship was with CDOT prior to the 2017 eclipse. Back in 2016, CDOT hired a meteorologist for the first time. Hit the mouse button, please. And I think we all know who that was. It was David Johnson. And he kind of transformed or helped us transform the relationship we had with CDOT. Before he was hired, our tie-in to CDOT wasn't all that great. And since he's been hired, things have completely turned around. Now we're like, we're completely simpatico, but with CDOT, we're attached at the hip. Next slide. And David was so successful. He was a one-person army for several years there before coming to Federal Highways that they now have 2 meteorologists on staff, and they're both excellent to work with. So next slide. So the partnership as it stands today, as I kind of mentioned or alluded to, we're pretty much on speed dial with each other, mostly for winter storm events, but we're also helping with, fire weather and, and severe weather. We have yearly tag ups with the 2 meteorologists just to make sure that we're meeting CDOT's needs and they're getting what they need from us. We're also pretty innovative, and I'll show an example of that in another slide. Next slide. So some of the things we do, eclipse or not, are tailored briefings mainly for winter weather, where CDOT will request these tailored briefings. It's sent out. We send it to CDOT as a PDF built through Google Slides. We break down each slide by their zones, their transportation zones, and we include all the key weather information that they need. The 3 Colorado offices that serve the bulk of Colorado, Grand Junction, Pueblo, and our office in Boulder, we all coordinate on this single briefing package so the CDOT just sees a seamless forecast targeted to their zones and with the snowfall, winds, and other information that we can provide. A lot of the time when we deliver these briefings, we also do a conference call where they let us lead off maybe 3 to 5 minutes on just what the key points are for the winter storm to expect. So we've got that really tight relationship going, and it's been going for years now. Next. So here's where the innovation comes in. Just in the last year, starting last year, all the Colorado forecast offices coordinated on video messaging sign suggestions. This is exactly what the interface looks like, that kind of spreadsheet that you see right there. So each office fills it out. The CDOT zones are on the left. They have access to the snow and wind products. And then we kind of recommend or give the message options for what to expect, whether it's, unbelievably heavy snow, impossible travel, and it's all kind of streamlined that way. We update this at least twice a day during active snowfall, prior to the snowfall, and then during the active snowfall. It's about twice a day. We'll update it and send it to CDOT. Next slide. Now we get to the eclipse. So on this map here, you'll see, our area of responsibility is north central, northeast Colorado. So you'll note that the totality path was well north of us. But as Vince showed before, the traffic, there's 4 million people that live along the Front Range of Colorado, and a lot of them wanted to see the eclipse. So the only way to do that was to drive north into Wyoming. Some went to the Nebraska Panhandle. But either way, the congestion on our north-south highways was intense. So CDOT was expecting 400,000 extra vehicles driving north before the eclipse, 900,000 people. So obviously, we already know about all the stress on infrastructure. Next slide. So how do we coordinate with CDOT? They wanted formal briefings via conference call at 1 p.m. each day leading up to the eclipse, and then 9 a.m. the day of the eclipse. Then they started doing the variable messaging signs on the 17th leading up to it. Next slide. So what was that coordination about? So they really wanted cloud coverage and location. And I know David and I know Vince mentioned it, and some of the other previous talkers mentioned that depending on where the clouds were, if it was super cloudy in one part of the totality path, everyone would migrate to the clear spot or a spot that they felt was going to be clear. So they needed to anticipate where that traffic flow would really go. We got lucky that day. Not really lucky, just it was a calm day for weather. But late August can still have some thunderstorms and even severe thunderstorms. So you don't really want that with hundreds of thousands of people outside. So they really need to know thunderstorm chances and if severe. And it can still be kind of hot in late August. So they wanted to know max temperatures. So at first they're like, well, you can just verbally brief us on this. But in 2017, we had the capability to do graphics. So next slide. So we did all this in a graphics form. Next slide, please. With high temperature and percentage of cloud cover. You know, I've been in the weather service. I've been a weather freak my entire life. That's most of the weather service people are. But I can't tell you how much I was sweating a cloud forecast. I have never sweat a cloud forecast as that morning and the days leading up to it, because we knew how much was riding on what our forecast was going to say based on where we thought it would be the thickest cloud cover. So these graphics, they don't look that great, 2017 graphics ability, but in 2024, our graphics are far superior to this. Any office that you all work with, any weather service office can easily reproduce much better graphics than this in today's technology. So cloud cover, we could do it every 3 hours. We could even do it every hour if you want for that. Next slide. So we delivered that to CDOT. If you can hit play, did this just a cool shot of satellite with the Eclipse going over Wyoming and Nebraska. This may not work. If it doesn't, we'll move on. Yeah, we'll move on. No problem. We've all seen the Eclipse before from satellite. So summarizing, it was really a non-event. We over forecast the clouds a little bit, so it was actually clearer than our forecast had it. Was not a single storm of any kind in Wyoming and Nebraska where the totality was. And CDOT, David, for sure, I think one of these was at least your quotes. You were ready, and you really love the cloud cover graphics. So those are easily things that any weather service office can do for a Department of Transportation agency. And thank you for your time. Oh yeah, I'll be ready for the next one. That's going right overhead for us, so that'll be a good one.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Those cloud cover graphics, I might have a little bit of nightmare about that tonight, but thanks for
Right.
sharing. Appreciate it, and thanks for continuing Pathfinder at CDOT. So I think we'll do a 10-minute break. Obviously, we're a little bit behind, so we'll be back at about 2:45 p.m. Eastern, and we'll kick off with work zone management considerations when we get back. And the rapid fire slides, again, will be cycling through on the break. And if you see anything of interest, feel free to reach out to the points of contact on the slides. And we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thanks. All right, welcome back, everybody, and thanks for joining us for the second half of the webinar. For this section, we're going to talk about considerations for work zone management and modifying things like construction activities leading up to the solar eclipse. Jawad Paracha from my work zone management team, who's the work zone management program manager, will be covering the opening slides. So Jawad, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. Yes. So I would like to start with the couple of points that the presenters have already made. One, events like solar eclipse generate increased demand, traffic impacts, and especially on the day off and immediately following the event. And then the second thing, which has already been covered also in a number of presentations, especially by Patrickson, that a proactive operations mindset is needed. It's critical to effectively manage these impacts in terms of safety, mobility, and considering all road users. So work zones actually make this if they are there and lane closures are in place, will further complicate this scenario, result in increased impacts to road users, and cause a lot of safety and mobility impacts. So it's a challenge. It's something that we should plan ahead for, and should be a part of our broader comprehensive management approach to minimize impacts. Next slide. So, first thing, as I mentioned, a proactive operations mindset is needed in case of work zone management also. So, as a part of broader traffic impact analysis and diagnostic assessment of previous events, we should look at identifying the routes which are expected to be congested, identifying the hotspots, and then planning well in advance of the event to manage any work zone along those routes and hotspots. So I would consider projects in different categories, projects which are in the planning stage, but will result in short-term closures, like the closures which on a daily basis, but then the lanes get opened. Projects which result in capacity reduction because of long-term lane closures, and then ongoing road work like maintenance activities. So in case of projects which with the daily type lane closures especially, we should try our best that the lane restrictions for at least for the day off and following, if not for more days, should be a part of the planning of the transportation management plan, development of the transportation management plan process. So whether it's through a general note or whether it's through a special provision, and the general note, I will share a resource on the next slide, which is basically where a state DOT. I'm going to talk about this slide later. Can we go back to the previous slide? Yes, thanks. So where a state DOT actually shared the note well ahead, a couple of years ahead of the event, and so that the planners can actually design the TMP accordingly, considering that no lane closures should be for a period before and after the event. So that's where the first category is. The second category is for the projects which will have capacity reduction, and this is where transportation management plans are critical. Mitigation strategies need to be developed based on the traffic impacts. based on all the road users being affected. And part of those mitigation strategies can be smart work zone solutions for queue warning, for detours, for traveler information, or any other tool. So it's a tool in the toolkit for coming up with the mitigation strategies. So smart work zones are, I think, very important part of that toolkit. Then there are projects which are ongoing road work or maintenance type work, and this is where the permitting process is important, and we should use that permitting process to make sure that there is no lane closure on the at least on the day off and following the event. And in all of these cases, effective communication with our internal and external road audience stakeholders is critical. With that, I would go to the next slide. So here are some resources: FHWA's website on work zone management, National Work Zone Safety Information Clearinghouse, to learn more about smart work zones, TMPs, or any other tool in the toolkit for effectively managing work zones. And then there are a couple of examples there from state DOTs. In the case of Arkansas, there's a special provision to limit mainline lane closures from April 5 to 9, and reducing worker exposure. In case of Ohio DOT, they put in a note in the traffic engineering manual for the last, and the note has been there for the last couple of years for the designers so that they can plan all the projects accordingly. And the note basically asks for restricting lane closures from 12 noon on Friday to 6 a.m. on Wednesday. So it starts before the event, and then it ends after the event. And then it talks about maintaining pedestrian access also. So these are some examples of how to effectively manage work zones, but we need to consider all types of work zones. Again, one which are in the planning stage, one which will result in capacity reduction, and also the one ongoing road work. With that, David?
Thanks, Jawad. Appreciate it. Really good insights into some things to consider for work zone management. And we got Chris Engelbrecht is back for part 2, sharing his expertise from the Missouri DOT side of things. Chris, thanks for joining us again, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so we've spoken about a lot of the items already at kind of an overall perspective, and when it comes to the work zones, we'll get a little more detailed here. Next slide, please. So one of the first things that I want to make sure that we consider, of course, being a safety professional too, is worker safety. We tend to concentrate a lot on the motorist and the folks that are driving through the state, but we talk about 4 minutes of darkness. If we do have work that's going on and we do have our workers near the roadway, we definitely want to make sure that they're visible. Having the appropriate class of material for reflectivity is very important. That PPE for night work, consider stepping up to a class 3 with class E. Bottoms also would be very helpful. Again, 4 minutes of darkness doesn't sound like that much, but when you're going through a normal daylight period and it changes quickly back and forth, that's pretty important. If we are going to be doing any time of operation like flagging, consider the temporary lighting or even other types of work where if you can pause work for that 5 minutes or so to just stop completely. If you're not able to avoid, suspending the work for the entire day, then definitely take that into consideration. That's, of course, a good break time. We don't want people distracted, either driving or working in the work zones. Next slide, please. So again, before the event, anything that we can do to really adjust those work schedules. We talked about having those job special provisions. If the contract or permit hasn't already been, awarded, it's a little bit easier. But, sometimes it's hard to convince some of our contractors that they need to shut down work for a day. So again, let's do everything we can to avoid those lane closures, especially, and even work off to the shoulder, because that can be problematic when we start talking about congestion and trying to relieve congestion. Definitely avoid flagging operations altogether. Again, just not a good scenario with the amount of people. And even if you think you're working on a roadway that's not going to be impacted, maybe it's a secondary route that still connects. When we see, again, cloud cover or that mass migration, people will find other routes, or certain GPS will lead them down routes that we really don't want them to be on, and they'll end up in your work zone. So anything you can do to manage that upfront, especially limiting those permits for work, super loads, over dimension, over width, they're only going to create more problems in addition to the other things that you're already trying to deal with on the congestion side. So next slide. So as far as the traffic management side, we talked earlier about identifying those traffic generators. Where are the hotels, the campgrounds, the special activities, the festivals and things that are going to be happening, and where is that traffic going to, and where are they going to be released from in a very quick manner. So, and what work zones, again, are within those paths, but not only within the path of those large generators, but also what is a connecting route that people are going to try to jump off on at the last minute if they start seeing congestion on the major roadways, because they will quickly become clogged up too. That's an experience we noticed in 2017 when we went back to relook at the kind of the traffic counts and where the congestion occurred. We had a lot of congestion on secondary lettered routes that connected to other states. So identify those high impact locations where you expect the traffic, those signal locations where you can maybe do some retiming, modify that timing, and also, again, be prepared to do manual intersection control with law enforcement if necessary. Again, I think we can figure a lot of those areas out well ahead of time. And there may be some festivals or other events that you may want to consider right in, right out only movements, just to keep that traffic flowing, because you will quickly create, again, some crashes and other congestion if we're trying to alternate vehicles in and out different locations. Next slide, please. Utilize all of the ITS devices you have, at your fingertips. There's a lot of options for real-time congestion monitoring that are pretty accurate, even as simple as Google Maps, some of the here and Redis data that we've got out here available, but, very timely, crowdsourced information, whether it's things like Waze or Facebook Live during special events. We've also found that the live streaming of some of these events really give us an idea of where the problems are going to occur, whether it's a civil unrest type issue or the lone wolf attacks and the, I won't say terrorists necessarily, but those folks that want to do bad things are typically streaming some of these things nowadays. So having the availability to look at your closed circuit television and maybe even putting up temporary cameras that you can funnel back into your emergency operations center are also very important. Traffic counters, road sensors, anything that are going to detect the issues that we have going on, and then making the most out of our dynamic message signs for messaging for folks as they travel through. Next slide. So public information, we've talked a lot about today. And again, we do have some joint efforts, multi-state efforts through AASHTO and Federal Highway to kind of coordinate some of these multi-state communications plans for consistency. It's also important to, if you're going to be posting things on social media, to coordinate with your state emergency management agency and your joint information center to coordinate those messages to make sure that we're talking the same language. And again, timely updates, social media posts, and messaging is very important. Next slide. As far as incidents, we know they're going to occur. We heard Wyoming talking about some of the incidents that they experienced, but it's very important when we start talking about this level of volume, protect that queue, the backup traffic, because generally in the traffic incident management world, the secondary crash can be a lot worse than the first in a lot of cases. Monitor that traffic flow, and again, consider pre-staging some of your traffic control devices in case you run into issues that you can quickly deploy, because with the congestion, you may not be able to get resources to and from some of those areas. And then also, again, having those predetermined incident bypass routes ready to go and staffed in some cases where if you need to do manual control to efficiently move people. Next slide. And just a few other thoughts real quickly, and then we'll close out here on my section. But water navigation, we don't think a lot about work zones and water, but we do have a lot of bridge construction going on, and there will be people that launch boats, and you may see a lot of congestion on waterways. Mississippi River is in the path. You may have several lakes, and if you're doing, again, barge work and other things, you may have a lot of conflicts with smaller boats, and the same thing with the airport side. If you're doing construction on the airstrips, you know, you may actually have a lot more air traffic that day, maybe even at capacity in a lot of airports. Distracted, impaired drivers, when you have festivals and you have special events and time, you also have impaired drivers typically. And then we've already mentioned weather condition, but some things to think about too. Monitor your rest areas, because those can quickly back up onto your mainline interstates and create some real problems for you. And then again, communications have been talked about several times. Next slide. And then just stay aware of the situation and keep your motorist aware, whether it's the 511 system or like our Missouri Traveler map here. We try to post incidents, keep people updated with real-time traffic information and a location map of what's going on for incidents. Next slide. And that's what I have. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to our peer exchange in St. Louis in a couple of weeks. So I'll see you there. And thanks again for joining us. Next up, we'll talk about considerations for traffic incident management. And to walk us through the introduction there, we have Joe Tebow, who's a program manager under the traffic incident management team. Joe, he's got one arm, but he's ready to present. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me, everybody. Next slide, Kevin, please. Yeah, and even let's go to the next one. Hey, this is the three legs of my bar stool, if you would, me being one, right? I look at the participant list and I see a lot of great TIM champions on here, and that makes me happy. But many of you know Paul Joden and Jim Ostrich, who are also part of the national TIM team. So, you know, we work on this all together, and we thank you for all your efforts. Next slide, Kevin. So I once again, looking at the list of participants, I see a lot of TIM champions. I see a lot of folks that don't recognize, and I'm sure there's someone here who may very well be hearing about TIM for the very first time. So what is traffic incident management? And first off, when we say traffic incident management, automatically most folks think, oh, crashes, right? Well, it's more than crashes, right? Of course, that's the primary response from our community. But we deal with everything out there, from dropped loads off of tractor trailers to agricultural issues to even livestock, right? If it's something that disrupts the normal flow of traffic on the roadway, it's a traffic incident, and our program helps to manage that. And when you think about the numbers here that you're looking at this slide, right? 6.1 million crashes a year, that's about 16,000 crashes a day on a normal day, right? Without an eclipse, you know? So, you know, there's a lot of response and a lot of exposure out there. And it also creates additional safety hazards for the motoring public, and really ties up and has a huge impact on commerce. So it's evidence-based. It was created by responders for responders. And our response community is fire, rescue, EMS, law enforcement, towing and recovery, and state safety service patrols. That is our primary community of responders who like to identify themselves as masters of disaster, right? We go into action when everything else is kind of like falling apart. Next slide, Kevin. The national program, once I already said, by responders for responders, but we're up to a little over 700,000 responders trained to the national TIM program. And we're working on having it institutionalized across the country. That is in training academies and other organizations. Actually, Kentucky and Georgia, as you see, they actually have TIM training as part of their paramedic program. And there's many ways to get the TIM training, and I'll tell you about those a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So I said, that it saves lives, time, and money, and out of Arizona, 30% fewer secondary crashes, utilizing the program of TIM and the concepts associated with it, and much lower, up to 35% incident clearance times through TIM, using those practices and the coalition of responders all being trained to the same program. It pays dividends. Next slide, please. We've also been delegated with part of the National Roadway Safety Strategy for post-crash care for EMS. And it plays a part in all of this Eclipse building, right? Because part of post-crash care is ensuring that there's expedient access to emergency medical care. So while we've been talking about this and the staging of apparatus and who are our players, don't forget the EMS community and the fire community. It's all part of the National Roadway Safety System and the Safe System approach, post-crash care for EMS. Make sure they have a seat at your table in your planning stages. Next slide, Kev. EDC 7, Everyday Counts. This is round 7. We have technology for saving lives. And we're talking about the technologies that are out there that are underused but proven, and many different agencies that are using these technologies. So we're doing research and we're spreading the word and having some peer-to-peer reviews and workshops and covering all of these EDC 7, which are 6, and I'm about to talk to those 6 now. Kevin, there we go. There's our 6 technologies for EDC 7. Of which at least 2, if not 3, are very much in play for the Eclipse. We're talking about unmanned aerial systems for TIM. Well, think about this for a second. You have long stretches of road. You have areas out there you want to cover. You don't have cameras. You don't have any fixed video systems out there to feed back to TMCs. Well, there are safety service patrols and other agencies out there that have deployed tethered drones to their vehicles. And when you think about utilizing a tethered drone with full camera capabilities, including nighttime, and they can stream back to the TMC, and that tethered drone can stay in the air as long as that service vehicle that it's attached to has fuel, right? So it's up and it can monitor those blind areas that you'd like to keep an eye on. You can put a unit out there. Of course, the advanced warning throughout this Eclipse is going to be a huge deal, and it'll start a day or 2 or more in advance. The post-crash care I talked about, but also debris removal. Many of the safety service patrols out there are also capable of removing debris, maybe a partial lost load, something fell off the back of a truck, right? They can get out there, they could get it out of the traveled roadway, as long as they can get to it safely, right? And we're talking about, rural areas of 70-mile queues and 15.5-hour rush hours, so to speak, right? A lot of pre-planning and staging comes into play with that. Kevin, please. So the pre-planning, no different than any other event, except it's you're going to go from hopefully a bright sunny day, right, clear skies, and then sudden darkness, right, and then a few minutes later it's going to be daytime again. But this event's probably going to carry into the nighttime hours also. So this long duration event, when you do your risk assessments and needs assessments, remember it's going to be daytime, nighttime, and for hours on end. So when you do that risk assessment, make sure you're prepared for that. We all know where the hot spots are, and we talked about this. Several of the speakers that have talked about this did a good job about staging apparatus. And you know where your hot spots are. You know where that dead man's curve is. Everyone knows those spots. So, you know, when you stage for those areas out there, remember when you're building a temporary bullpen for staging apparatus or equipment, make sure those folks are protected too, you know, Jersey walls or whatever, you know, to ensure that any runaway vehicle, if they're roadside, that they're also protected while they're out there. You have your traffic control plans, maybe you're refining them or making special appendixes for this particular event. Get all the right players to the table. You know, and I say right players, you know, and this doesn't apply to the entire country, but I'll address, you know, from the Northeast, right? Fire police brigades would be a huge help, and they're out there and willing to do it. Make sure you reach out to them, check your area, your jurisdiction to see if you have active fire police units out there. They're all volunteers, but they're equipped, they're ready to go, and they could probably give you a hand in your traffic control endeavors. The safe resource staging, I talked about that, and then your tabletop drills, right? Talk about your tabletop drills. Have at least one, right? And get a master of disaster out there to come up with something, right? You know, and have all the right players there. And one of the questions in the chat pod earlier was about communications, you know, in the rural areas, rural and remote areas, you know, communications can be a real challenge. And I'll ask, and I'll throw this out there as for the agencies, are you using GETS cards, GETS, GETS cards, and the WPS service that comes along with it? If not, you know, pop something up. I'll put the web address for the GETS link for Government Emergency Telecommunications Service. And what they'll do is that you're allowed into the system. They're not going to give you a cell phone signal if there's none to be had, right? But what they do is you get priority for access to existing signals for your communications, and it's free, right? It's a free service. So I'll pop a link to that site there for you folks that are interested in that. Next slide, Kevin, please. Working together, we have traffic incident management units, just designed for traffic incident management. Most of these units are housed within the fire service, fire rescue service. Some of the towing and recovery agencies have built their own traffic management units, but make sure they have a seat at the table and reach out to them. They can be a huge resource and a big benefit in your planning stages out there. And Kevin? So we do have many training opportunities, and you can jump on any of those between now and Eclipse time, because it doesn't take a lot of time. And Kevin, next slide, please. You can do it. You can schedule an in-person. There are state TIM committees in every state in the nation, right? You can reach out to them to get an instructor to come by. If you need one, to contact one, contact us. We'll get you in touch with an instructor to get you out there in person. However, we can do web-based, and through the our partners at National Highway Institute, you can access it there. This is all free. Or you can go to Emergency Responder Safety Institute. They have 10-module training program for TIM, but I believe they have up to 24 different modules dealing with all sorts of traffic incidents and all disciplines, right? And they're short, usually about 1-hour modules. So take advantage of that, if nothing else, to build your knowledge as to what's taking place in front of it if you're unfamiliar with TIM. Traffic incident management saves lives every single day, and it goes way beyond a crash, right? Way beyond the crash. So make sure the right folks are out there or have a seat at your planning table. They can contribute. Consider some of those technologies that are out there, whether it be unmanned aerial systems or the new technology of advanced warning, variable message boards and signage. There's a ton of stuff out there that's available, and many of you are using it now because like I said, I saw the participant list there, and so I know a lot of you folks are engaged in that already. But reach out, you know, mutual aid. If you don't have it, maybe the state next to you does, and they're willing to be a player, right? So utilize that mutual aid thing and tapping into your resources. David, I saw you pop up.
Thanks, Joe. Are you got any more slides? I was gonna say, I think
That's
that's
it.
the end, right? I don't want to
That's
pop
it
up
for
too
me.
early, but thank you for thanks for taking the time to share everything we're doing in the TIM program, and great work as always. Let's go ahead and move to our next speaker. Robin Helmericks. Robin is a traffic incident management coordinator for the state of Illinois with over 30 years experience in civil engineering and emergency management at the state, county, and federal levels. She covered the last eclipse as the emergency coordinator with the FHWA Illinois division, and now the 2024 event with the Illinois Department of Transportation in the State Emergency Operations Center. Robin, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Appreciate it, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I am recovering from a cold, so hopefully we get through this without me having a coughing fit. First thing I want to say is I am kind of covering this subject for our emergency coordinator at IDOT, Brandon Keller. So he's been integral in all the coordination for this with many of the other surrounding states as well. And before I forget, Joe mentioned something about having the capability with the GETS card and all that to get priority. There is also a program, I'm not sponsoring it by any means, but I actually have it on my phone through AT&T. It's FirstNet for all emergency responders. You got to jump through some hoops to get it, but it gives you priority and no slowdown of data. So just another thing to look at for this. But anyway, next slide, please. Kind of the relationships under our State Emergency Operations Center in Illinois. It's going to be activated just like it was back in 2017. And all of the agencies get there and everybody works together. And just as a normal disaster event, also included is like your American Red Cross, your Salvation Army. We have a business EOC, which covers the utilities, trucking industry, which we have a great relationship with our two main ones in the state, Midwest Trucker and Illinois Trucking Association. MABUS, which is mutual aid box alarm systems for the fire, EMS statewide throughout, so it covers all the fire departments. ILEAS, which is the Illinois Law Enforcement Alarm System, and the National Guard are some other ones that are part of that. Next slide. I wanted to just kind of throw a couple pictures in just so you can kind of see how things work. On the left side is our State Emergency Operations Center. And then the other three are within our Illinois Department of Transportation, our Station 1 based out of Springfield. It was built a couple years ago. There's 10 stations, a 10 by 40 video wall. We've integrated all the cameras in there. And then also there's a small breakout room that can also double up and throw up the screen just like it is in the other room. So we are prepared, and it kind of works in combination with IEMA, which we also share a link with. Next slide, please. The big thing with traffic incident management and the other disasters is the communication, coordination, and cooperation, the 3 C's. So kind of the main thing with this is we held a tabletop exercise on February 8th with all the new current agency representatives. So everybody had an opportunity to interact and give some stuff with the Eclipse. They threw in some injects. Everybody kind of worked together and kind of learned how everything was going to be working. IDOT started this process back in August of 2022, kind of started planning. And then in the summer of 2023, we met with a lot of local entities and kind of tried to meet their coordination preparation, what they're going to need, how they're responsible on their local roads for traffic flow and law enforcement. And then, we'll be there to meet what we can. If they can't meet the resource requests, then they'll submit them to us. Let's try to think what else. Our State Emergency Operations Center will be right in the middle of the state, Springfield. And then outside of the area, there'll be a State Unified Area Command. And then there's a couple other area commands in the area, and then a forward operating base. And then also, IDOT has various yards throughout the area. So all the coordination will be, disseminated in the area. And then next slide, please. Big thing to see here is our communication within the agencies. We have a fantastic relationship with our state police and direct contact with them at all points. We all have each other's cell phone numbers. We all reach out to each other. Everything is thrown back and forth. Our dispatch centers all have a great relationship with our TMCs. So, I mean, there is just coordination, unbeknownst to any others. What we do is at IDOT provide the liaisons to all those areas. We'll be monitoring the roadway conditions through Google Traffic, Travel Midwest, National Weather Service. We update road closure maps, and that's put out there just like everybody else's, like 511 system. We have it gettingaroundillinois.com. We'll be supporting the field personnel that day, relating all the incident information, deploy all the assets, give detours when needed, try to provide, information for any queuing, protection of emergency responders. We've all been traveling, with all the TIM stuff. All the state police have been through it because it's required at their academy. We coordinate with all the TMCs in the border states. And then we'll be using our camera system and use of dynamic message boards. Our PIOs will be out there. We'll be putting stuff out on all the platforms, the social medias. Also, we'll be monitoring through our TMC. We have GPS on all of our resources, like our tandem trucks. So we have a map that shows when they're in service, when they're out of service, where they're at, where their plows are even at. If they had to put down salt, we know what the salt rates are. And then ISP has the same thing through their system on their computer. So, and they have access to our information, so they know where we're at. So it's all of a great thing of just being able to, share all those resources. And same thing like some other states, our oversized, overweight permits. We'll be redirecting the permit loads during that time frame. And then also with the tows, all the troops have MOUs with tow companies in the area that are on rotation list. Now, by Illinois state law, which is very rare around the country, is we require any tow company on the tow rotation list to have traffic incident management training. The ISP troops go through and verify and do audits and double check. So that way we do have that TIM training out there with the whole groups. Next slide, please. This shows the path of where it was in 2017. And of course it passed through Carbondale, and we had 2 minutes, and there's a lot of lessons learned from that time frame. It was same thing as happened on a Monday. So people trickled in over the weekend. There were big festivals. And then what happened is everybody left right after the eclipse. So the roads were saturated. Luckily, we had no big incidents, but we did have a lot of congestion. Next slide, Pete, please. So just a few facts from the 2017, just kind of where it was at, and then what it will be. The next totality will be 4 minutes, 9 seconds, almost double of what it was. And then just for the next slide, then I'll have a few more facts. If you'll go to the next one, please. So the crossroads, and kind of one of the rare things, is it meets in about the same location, just a few miles south of Carbondale. So luckily we've had a little bit of time to plan, but for this event, it enters the state at like 12:42. Totality happens at 1:58, and then it ends at 2:06, and it exits at 3:20 p.m. So luckily, this is also happening on a Monday. So hopefully, we'll have some time to kind of prepare and get ready for this. And I was trying to see the average speed of how it travels through the state is 1,787 miles per hour. And we have like 129 centerline miles. Next slide, please. One thing that we did do after the 2017 event is there was an after action report developed, and it was about 2 pages long. And some of the key takeaways from that event that we have also included in our next one is more pre-planning with the local agencies and better traffic management. We're not allowing any lane closures unless essential. You know, if there's a bridge taken out, then of course we have to have that. And then also no unauthorized parking along the interstates or major routes or long-term in the rest areas. Our big thing is, you know, trucking and getting them through their hours of service time. So they have to have truck parking. So we are making signs up specifically for that event in all of our rest areas and not allowing passenger cars to park in the truck parking. They're to park in theirs only and no long-term. So that's another thing that we are taking into consideration. And also ahead of time, another thing we did is at IDOT, all the districts and their planning included in their traffic control special provisions requirements that to make sure that there were no construction things going on during that time so that the lanes would be open. Next, please. And kind of to finish up, we're trying to put out as many public advisories as possible, you know, to plan the routes and to make sure to stay a while after the eclipse is over, stay, eat, spend the night, you know, work from home. I know Southern Illinois University is shutting down the campus for the day as well to try to help out. So there's a lot of things kind of taken into consideration. But the main thing from this is everybody's talking, everybody's, you know, communicating and trying to coordinate the event together. So I hope I covered it all. And I thank you for your time.
Nice job, Robin. I appreciate it. It was a very good overview of what you all are planning. And I think we're going to skip the poll in the interest of time. But real quick, we have another session here, and then we'll close out with some resources after that. So I'm going to introduce Stephen Kern, who's a team leader in the Office of International Programs of Binational Programs, and Felicia Wolf, also a program manager, who's going to briefly talk about some of the international travel considerations, and then turn it over to Athena, who will speak more in detail on it. So I'll turn it over to you, Steve and Felicia.
Hi, everyone. I think Steve said that he was going to be jumping on here, so maybe he's just running a little bit late, but I'll get started. I'm Felicia Wolf. I'm the program manager for the Binationals program in the Office of International Programs. Steve Kern is our team leader. And I was just going to share a couple points about, oh, there's Steve.
Oh, well, I apologize. No, go
That's
ahead.
okay.
You got it started.
No, it's okay. I introduced our name, so you take it from here.
Okay, I apologize. I'm having some technical issues with my Zoom connection. Just very quickly, I'm the team leader for programs and federal highways. Our office works to facilitate interactions and exchanges with countries and organizations around the world to access, promote, and disseminate global best practices and technologies that can help improve the United States transportation system. We've got a few major programs in the office. Our team works mainly on binational programs related to country-to-country relationships that focus on long-term exchanges on a wide variety of topics. The multinational team focuses on working with international organizations such as the World Road Association, the European Commission, and other similar entities. We also have the Global Benchmarking Study, which focuses on accessing, acquiring, and adapting technologies and best practices that are already in use in other countries around the world that focus on priority topics that we can adapt here in the United States. And then we also have an international visitor program that focuses on foreign requests to come visit and meet with subject matter experts here in the United States. So those are just some of the programs we do. In relation to this, we've been reaching out to counterparts in Mexico and in Canada, and along the border areas where the eclipse is scheduled to transverse, to try and reach out and make sure everybody's communicating together and knows what the other countries are doing in terms of their response and preparation, as well as activities that might be taking place along the border. And that's it, short and sweet. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll give it back to you, David.
Thanks for hopping on. Appreciate you you guys jumping on. Our next speaker is let's see, Athena Hutchins. Athena Hutchins PE is the Executive Director of the Niagara International Transportation Technology Coalition, or NITEC, providing overall leadership and management responsibilities for the multi-agency international coalition of transportation entities in Western New York and Southern Ontario. As director of the coalition, Athena is responsible for multi-agency intelligent transportation systems, operations and technology deployment, information dissemination, standards development, incident management, and regional collaboration across international boundaries. Thanks for joining us, Athena, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks for having me today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about NITEC and who we are, and then I'll talk about some of the planning efforts we're involved in. So next slide. So NITEC's mission is really to improve mobility throughout this binational region. And, you know, in order to do that, really need to coordinate operations. So we work very closely with various entities throughout this region. You can see on the map where Western New York and Southern Ontario, we were established almost 30 years ago under a federal mobility grant. Really, it was to bring the partners in the region together to make sure we're coordinating operations across, especially the border crossing region. There's 3 major bridge crossings in the region, and 2 different bridge entities own and operate those bridges. There's another bridge that's a nexus only. We don't get as much traffic over that bridge, but there's 3 primary bridges. So again, part of the premise of us being formed was to help coordinate that amongst this region. We work very closely with, right now we have 42 member agencies that are a part of us. They're the transportation agencies, public safety, border enforcement, emergency services, recovery, work with so many different partners throughout our region very closely. We're the only binational coalition of its kind between US and Canada. Next slide. So want to talk a little bit about regional operation and some of the functions we do. We at NITEC, we get heavily involved in helping coordinate and collaborate with the different agencies. Really, it's about bringing everybody together. We meet on a regular basis. We don't just, you know, get together when there's something big's going to happen or a snow event. We're constantly meeting on a regular basis. We have various committees. The agencies have stakeholders that are represented at these committees, and we meet and work on different initiatives. You know, every year we look at where do we need to make improvements. You know, any kind of, you know, pulling in additional members, you know, that's where we help pull that together in the region. And like I said, traveler information, border crossing, you know, emergency management. These are just some of the functions we do in this region, special event planning and management. So again, this is where we have an opportunity to bring all of our partners together at the table and help work together and make sure how we're all operating throughout the region, and, you know, whether it's sharing resources or just helping each other out. And then we collect a lot of data, we report on that and make that information available to the agencies as well. Next slide. So we run a traffic operations center on behalf of the agencies in the region. So we are 24/7 operations. We are the New York State Department of Transportation's operations center for this region for them. They don't have their own operations center. We're really kind of the information clearinghouse. You call into our operations center, and then we have that ability to contact the different agencies, the different first responders, anyone who might need the information and share it out. We help coordinate that. And again, when it comes to event planning and pulling all the agencies together, that's something we have done over the years, really, and working closely. We operate about 175 cameras in this region. We are binational. We operate the various intelligent transportation systems in Western New York, but we are in close communication with Southern Ontario and Canada with their operation center. And then we're sharing and making sure, you know, we're standardizing messages and we're just working together so it's seamless. Next slide. So again, like I said, the various intelligent transportation systems throughout the region that we operate on behalf of the agencies. New York State Thruway Authority runs through our region. And then the two bridge operators, the Peace Bridge Authority and Niagara Falls Bridge Commission, we have access to some of their cameras and we can help with some of that information. And then the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, we work very closely with them. We have access to some of their cameras as well. And we're relaying and communicating back and forth information. Our advanced traffic management system is communicating directly with various systems. So it's getting information in from the ministries, their system right into our system, and it's an automatic feed. We're feeding 511 New York with traffic information. So again, it's really sharing the information back and forth across the region and making it seamless. You know, the different agencies own and operate the different equipment, but we're the ones that are able to standardize messaging and put the various messages signs up on the signs throughout the entire region. Next slide. And then traveler information, that's where we have the ability to share the information with the traveling public. So like I said, we operate the dynamic message signs on the US side, and then we're in direct coordination on the Canadian side to relay the same informations across the border. You know, we do various campaigns, incident information, travel times, border wait time information. So that is something in this region with the 3 border crossings. We've really worked over the years to make sure we're balancing the load of traffic across all 3 bridges and not just having large delays at one of the bridges. So we've worked very closely on that. We share an automated system. We all are collecting the same information and sharing it out to our websites, but it's one system that has border delay information that is being shared. NITEC has a website where it's pulling in all this information from all the different agencies onto one platform. And again, it's also available on 511 New York and 511 Ontario. We have an app as well where you can go on and get the information. You can see our streaming camera images. Like I said, there's about 170 cameras in the region on our website that are streaming. We also operate almost 40 overhead message signs. A lot of the portable message signs, we operate those on behalf of the agencies as well in the region. Next slide. So everyone has seen this path on various slides. So next slide. So we zoomed into the Buffalo area. As you can see, it's right at the right by Niagara Falls. So the Buffalo area around 318, but really, you know, it's starting the partial eclipse around 2 o'clock, I think 2:05, and ending around 4:32-ish. We've got about 3 minutes and 45 seconds in Buffalo of the total eclipse. Buffalo is on the direct center line. So we're envisioning a lot of people coming to this region. Niagara Falls, with close proximity to Buffalo, people going to that area as well. Next slide. So some of the concerns is we're hearing potentially 1 million visitors to our area. I know the hotels have been sold out for quite some time. Niagara Falls has been identified as a very high designated location for people to, you know, witness the eclipse at, get some, you know, nice pictures over the falls. The nice thing is visitors will be arriving. It'll be spread out through the weekend. We envisioning Friday, Saturday, Sunday, leading into Monday. So don't really anticipate a lot of traffic issues leading into it. It's really more so going to be after the event. And then the timing of it, the partial eclipse ends around 4:30, which again, that really starts getting into normal rush hour traffic for Buffalo. So not quite sure, you know, what normal rush hour traffic is going to look like that day, anticipating, you know, there'll be schools are closed, there'll be some work from home situations, but again, we'll still have some, you know, normal business, you know, rush hour traffic. And then traffic across the border is something that we anticipate. Now, there are events we're tracking on the US side, some large events, and then also on the Canadian side as well. So I mean, the ideal situation would be people come to maybe down from Toronto and they go to Niagara Falls in Ontario and they witness and stay there and then return back. And then same in Buffalo, you know, whether they're coming from the east or the south, they're going to come and then they're going to stay on the US side and not cross. But it's hard to know exactly what kind of traffic you're going to have going across the border, or if, depending on the weather, obviously that's can change things significantly, depending on as the forecast is, you know, leading up to Sunday and cloud cover, we'll have to figure out what we kind of think might be happening. I know we will be doing some messaging ahead of time to let people know, you know, make sure you're not stopping on highways, you know, be prepared, and then really trying to work on, you know, making sure some of the congested roadways that first responders can get access to hospitals and emergency centers. So a lot of those were concerns that we're trying to make sure we're addressing. The waterways, now April in Buffalo, you know, it could be a nice sunny 70-degree day and it could be snowing and not so nice. So the water on Lake Erie, Lake Ontario is still very cold at that time. So I know there's, you know, we've had a lot of discussions with the US Coast Guard on, you know, making sure the waterways are safe as well. So next slide. So we began planning this obviously over a year ago. We've been working closely with the different agencies on a regular basis, talking at our various committee meetings and working through, you know, what any concerns are, what we need to be planning for. And we've, like I said, we've been holding the various meetings. We are having a large stakeholder meeting next week on February 29th to really make sure we're working with our border crossing committee, our incident management committee, with both in our Western New York group and our Southern Ontario group, and then our traffic operations center committee as well, and really pulling those members together and making sure that we're all on the same page. The agencies themselves can give updates on, you know, what their various plans are. And then, you know, we're helping coordinate and kind of pull that information together in the region. We've started to develop messaging plans. You know, now that we know where some of the larger events are, we can do various messaging plans in advance and, you know, be prepared to have our systems ready to go if we need to enact different plans. We're also starting to look at various kind of, whether it's diversion route plans or, you know, toggling traffic at different areas. We're starting to pull some together, some different maps, working with the agencies to see about staging resources. I know, like I said, working very closely with various task groups. There's, you know, our Office of Emergency Management we're working closely with for New York State. There's a traffic mitigation plan that's been circulated. So kind of pulling all that information and making sure various regions throughout the state, you know, we're learning from each other and preparing and pulling these together. And then also we're trying to coordinate with the Ministry of Transportation Ontario as well on what are their messaging plans like, when messaging plans look like, what does their traffic management plans look like, just to make sure we're consistent and relaying the same messaging across this region, and really just making sure then, you know, we're all on the same page. So we're anticipating, you know, a large turnout at our February 29th meeting. We've had various meetings leading up to this. So really a lot of it's now reporting out. And we've had these various meetings where each agency has been reporting out what are their plans, what is their staffing, you know, what, you know, staging of resources, pulling that together. And again, that's where NITEC can bring that, where we're helping all the agencies pull together. So New York State DOT has their plans and what they're doing. We're able to kind of fold that into an overarching plan. You know, what are Thruway Authority's plans, the county, there's 4 counties within our region, and there's various events happening throughout the counties. So again, pulling that in. And then we've been having very kind of localized meetings as well, making sure that the stakeholders, you know, for instance, in Niagara Falls, making sure we're working closely with the police and the fire there, you know, the state parks there, knowing that they're going to have an influx of travelers coming to the Niagara Falls region as well. So again, a lot of coordination we are doing and pulling together these various plans, but just making sure. And, you know, one of the things NITEC's been doing is helping go through a lot of the lessons learned from the 2017 eclipse, and then bringing that to the different agencies, you know, and sharing that information. So this webinar has been very helpful. Like I said, we're going to pull some of this information that we're hearing today, provide that at our February 29th meeting with all of our stakeholders, and make sure we're, let's learn from what others have done throughout the region and help with that. So next slide. So again, like big draw, a lot of happening. And we've been fortunate. There's a whole consortium here in Western New York that's been very proactive. A lot of the astronomers, they've had a whole series of meetings. We're one of the stakeholders as far as the traffic and transportation goes. So we've been participating in those meetings on a regular basis and helping share that information across, outside of kind of the traffic management piece, but making sure those entities understand, what the capabilities are and how we're collaborating with the agencies and working together in our region. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Athena. I really like those posters. Those were sharp. And like you said, the regional coordination that you're doing is so important. It just adds an extra layer of coordination to big events like this. But I really like those posters. Those are cool.
I don't take credit for them. They were developed by various groups here in Buffalo, but they did develop these and for use in publications. So
very nice. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. All right, well, we're getting ready to wrap up here. There are a few additional, tools and strategies and resources I wanted to cover. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Obviously, the public messaging piece is something everybody talked about. It's very important. So, in reaching out to our internal MUTCD team, they offered some MUTCD compliant messaging that they utilize and recommended during the 2017 eclipse. Just a little bit of background on changeable message signs. They can be an extremely effective tool to provide real-time traffic warnings, guidance information to the traveling public. But in order for a CMS or a changeable message sign to really be useful and effective, there's 5 areas that it really needs to meet. One is it needs to fulfill a need. 2, it needs to command attention. 3, it needs to convey a clear and simple meaning. And 4 is command respect from road users. And the last one is make sure you give people an adequate amount of time for the proper response. So on the first one, to fulfill a need, that's really just providing an actionable information, giving information to folks on what to expect. Commanding attention is, by the nature of displaying an illuminated sign on a highway and their placement, you can really take advantage to gain people's attention, particularly maybe when they're driving and you don't want them looking at their cell phones, or maybe they don't have access to the internet or some other reason. We need it to make sure it conveys a clear and simple meaning. So clear and simple messages, they avoid witticisms, colloquialisms, anything with popular culture references that only target a certain aspect of the traveling public, or you kind of have to understand the inside joke to really get what the message is trying to convey. We really don't want that. That actually can cause some issues. Commanding respect from the road users, that's really gained by continually putting valid, impactful information on a changeable message sign. So when you start putting messages that really aren't actionable or they're more unauthoritative tone, you can really lose your audience with your CMS approach. So try and consider that. And also the last point is using non-standard or unconventional syntax. It's kind of similar to the inside jokes or the popular culture references. That doesn't really give people enough time to understand the message, and not only that, but it can actually confuse them. And if that happens, then people might react unpredictably, or they might actually react in the opposite way that you want them to. So just a few things to consider. There's a couple of examples there. If you go to the next slide, we do have a point of contact that the MUTCD team has identified. That's Tony Whitfield. If you have any questions on maybe an example message that you're thinking about putting up, or just any questions you might have on messaging for something like a planned special event, feel free to reach out to her. There's also QR codes that'll take you exactly to the sections of the MUTCD that will give you a little bit of good guidance on what to do. But really, those examples, just keep it short, keep it clear, keep it simple. The arrive early, stay put, stay late, something like that, or post-eclipse congestion expected, things like that. Just stuff that folks can at least understand. But I just wanted to provide that brief overview because I know the changeable message sign piece is very important with planned special events. Next slide, please. If you haven't already been able to tell, we have a whole bunch of resources, whether it be from internal resources like these, or we also have external, just a myriad of things that you can go to get more information. Hopefully you've seen that we've provided contact information throughout the entire presentations. That's an open invitation for anybody to reach out to us. Anybody on the team in FHWA, we're always open and willing to help. We get questions from the field or from state DOTs or local agencies all the time asking for, how would you react to this, or do you have any resources to provide on that? And the answer is always yes. So just a few. I'm not going to run through all these, but for those who are familiar with our capability maturity framework tool, almost every program area that is under my team, we all have capability maturity frameworks for road weather management, for work zone management, traffic incident management. We also have one for planned special events. So if you click on that link or the link that Zach just provided in the chat, that'll take you to the CMF tool. You can do it very quickly on your desktop. It takes like 5 minutes to kind of get a brief overview of your levels of maturity. It's a really good way to grade where you think your agency is in preparing for planned special events. And if a need arises or you think that you could do better, we'll actually do in-person workshops for any of these program areas using the capability and maturity framework to kind of identify gaps that might exist in your agency and also provide next steps on how to improve those. We also have a lot of reports. Managing travel for planned special events, I believe was mentioned by Lori earlier. We also have ITS for planned special events. The Pathfinder project was mentioned under the road weather management section. That's really the communication and collaboration piece with your National Weather Service partners and various other things. We actually did a webinar in April of 2022 going over NASA's overview of the eclipse, as well as Ohio DOT's really good pre-work on the eclipse. That was 2 years ago. So agencies have obviously been thinking about this, but again, it's never too late to get started. There's actions and planning activities you can do now or in the days ahead of the eclipse. So start thinking about those. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide will highlight available resources from external partners. Obviously, NOCO will be posting this webinar, but they also have a solar eclipse webpage. NASA, we heard from Dr. Korek. They're a great resource, as well as the AAS and the Great American Eclipse web pages have great maps and links to things like glasses and things like that. A little bit on our side, we will be doing an in-person solar eclipse peer exchange. It is by invitation only. For those who already know about it, you've already been invited. But that'll be taking place on March 6th in St. Louis. That's not to say that all of you who have been a part of the webinar can't participate. In particular, we're going to be building out a 2024 solar eclipse final report and case study. Those will probably be published in early 2025. But I think the next slide kind of speaks to, we really want to hear from you. Like those posters that Athena showed, any sort of pictures or strategies or information or data that you can provide. We would love to have it in our Eclipse final report. And we would obviously cite you as the ones who provided us that information. And it's a really good way to get visibility into your programs and some of the lessons learned. So think about reaching out to us if you have anything you'd like to share for us to put in the final report or the case study. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. So I appreciate all the 300 of you that have made it to the end. Thanks again for sticking on with us. I hope this was informational for you, and I hope you have some actions to take from this. And at the very least, some points of contact for you to reach out to. There's my contact information. If you have anything disruption related that you'd like to talk with me about or my team, always open to chat, and I can go to any meetings that you'd like me to speak to. Same with anybody on my team. We're all here to help, and we want everybody to stay safe out there. So thanks again. We appreciate your time, and if you have any questions or need any additional information, feel free to reach out. And with that, I will thank NOCO for hosting us. Thanks again for the ICF and Athey Creek team for helping me pull all this together. Thank you again to our speakers and for sharing your incredible expertise and experience. There's so much information that we can share with each other. So thank you for participating, and thanks to you all for attending. So with that, take care, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.